guys, Davey here. Before we dive into this conversation, I just want to let everyone know that Nothing is Wasted is coming to Indianapolis, which is such a weird thing to say because we're stationed here. We're headquartered here in Indianapolis. But what I mean by that is we're hosting the Healing Leader Roundtable for the first time in Indianapolis this March 6th. Now, the Healing Leader Roundtable is a one-day event for pastors, ministry leaders, lay leaders, counselors, therapists, nonprofit leaders, where we dive deeper into how to create environments where people can heal, environments that are biblically centered, spirit-filled, and trauma-informed. We think all three of those components are critical. You see, we found ourselves at a critical time in church history. Anxiety, depression, mental unhealth, it's at an all-time high. And unaddressed pain and trauma has the potential to paralyze the Big C church and its leaders more than anything else. And I'm telling you, we see it all over. As we're working with churches, as we're working with ministry leaders, the enemy is doing everything he can to leverage pain and trauma against the church. I mean, how many times have you seen people in your congregation or organization begin to get on mission and move into their purpose, and then something happens in their life, it knocks them off course? We'd love to invite you, if you're a pastor, a ministry leader, counselor, nonprofit leader, and your entire team, to a one-day roundtable event designed to equip you with a holistic approach to healing your organization, all the way from the leadership to the lay people. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by the pressing needs in your congregation or the emotional toll that it takes on you personally, we'd love to have you join us for this special event. You can find out more information and register at nothingiswasted.com/roundtable. Again, nothingiswasted.com/roundtable. But jump on this quick because there's an early bird rate that ends in the middle of February. nothingiswasted.com/roundtable. Now, if you're not a ministry leader, I know we've got a lot of you guys podcast listeners here in Indianapolis. If you're not a ministry leader, but you would love your leadership to know about this, we'd love your help getting the information about this event to your pastor, to your church leadership, to your ministry leadership. Spread the word that Nothing is Wasted Ministries is bringing the Healing Leader Roundtable to Indianapolis March 6th. They can get more information at nothingiswasted.com/roundtable. We'll put the link right in the show notes. Now, don't delay. This is a special one-day event, and they often reach capacity. We've done these all over the country, and they usually sell out. So make sure you get this information to your pastor quickly, or if you're a pastor, make sure you jump on this before the early bird rate expires. We'd love to see you, your church leadership, at this event so we can talk deeper into how to create environments inside the church where people can heal and get back on mission. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. My name is Davey. I'm one of your hosts of the podcast. I'm so excited to have you joining us this week as we dive into our latest conversation, which, by the way, is an awesome conversation with our good friend of the pod, as they say, friend of the podcast, Carlos Whittaker. Carlos has been a friend of mine for a while, and he was an early guest on the Nothing is Wasted podcast, like in the conception of the Nothing is Wasted podcast. I remember he and I sitting in an Airbnb in Nashville having a in-person conversation. We had just gotten podcast equipment, just started the whole thing up. Carlos was one of the first guests that we ever had. So if you've been following the Nothing is Wasted podcast for a long time, then you probably listened to that conversation. We centered it around his book, Kill the Spider, which was an awesome, awesome book. And he has just released a new book called Reconnected: How 7 Screen-Free Weeks with Monks and Amish Farmers Helped Me Recover the Lost Art of Being Human. And I'm telling you, I love this conversation. I love this topic because this is a topic that we're exploring a lot right now as parents. As an adjacent mention, I am reading or listening to the book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, and just seeing how screens and social media and that kind of connectivity has drastically impacted a generation, not just my generation, I'm nearing 40, but most importantly, the generation behind us. But everywhere in between, we've all been impacted by screens. We've all been impacted by social media, the social media phenomenon. And what's really interesting about this is we live in the most connected era of all of history. And yet, if you were to poll most people would say they feel alone, they feel disconnected, they don't feel seen, they don't feel understood, they don't feel like they have real close connections, intimacy. And it's because I think really in a large part, these screens are getting in the way. And so Carlos decided to do an experiment and go 7 screen-free weeks, literally not even seeing a screen for 7 weeks, and went to live with monks and went to live with Amish farmers. And then he writes about it in this book, Reconnected. That's the conversation that we have today, and it is a powerful one. If you don't know Carlos Whittaker, you got to go and follow him on Instagram. He calls it his Insta Familia that follows him on Instagram. He does a phenomenal job of just bringing you along the journey and creating a space where people can feel safe to engage in conversations that matter. His motto is don't stand on issues, walk with people. Don't stand on issues, walk with people. And I think that is such an important reminder to all of us, especially in this day and age where the vitriol of the conversation of society can get so polarizing that we don't walk with each other. And here at Nothing is Wasted Ministries, we're going to constantly remind you of how powerful the ministry of presence is, what it looks like to walk with each other, create space where people can downregulate, where they can actually experience the power of the Holy Spirit because they're not so frenetic or they're not in fight or flight mode all the time. And we have an opportunity to do that. As the people of God, we have the opportunity to show up for people, to create space where people can heal. And I love the fact that Carlos is reminding us of this. If you want to go get if you want to pause this and go back and listen to episodes 9 and 10 of the Nothing is Wasted podcast, that's when Carlos Whittaker originally was on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. And then you can come back and listen to this, or you can go and listen to that after you listen to this. It's going to be, I'm telling you, you're going to love this conversation with Carlos. And if you don't know Carlos, you're going to love him. Before we dive into my conversation, I do want to remind you that if you're looking to take a first step or a next step in your healing journey, I want to invite you to 5 Steps to Taking Back Your Story. It's a Zoom call that I do once a month where I walk through what I believe are 5 steps to taking back your story, no matter what you've gone through. And it's an actual Zoom call. It's not a webinar. So, your faces are up there. We do live Q&A. I just love to serve in that way once a month. It's really always a very sacred time to be able to connect with you guys who are listening to and watching the Nothing is Wasted podcast. So I want to invite you to that. You can go to nothingiswasted.com/start here, or go to nothingiswasted.com and click the Start Here link at the very top of the page and join us on our next 5 Steps to Taking Back Your Story Zoom call. Okay, we're going to go ahead and dive into my conversation with Carlos Whittaker. It is rich. It is inspiring. It is, he might have you laughing and crying. This is Carlos. That's what he does. But you're going to want to lean in and take notes in this conversation. Here's my convo with Carlos Whittaker. Well, Carlos Whittaker, welcome back to the Nothing is Wasted podcast. It has been a while, my man.
I know. And I love that you get to say welcome back because I've been here before.
There are very few people that we have said welcome back to. So you are literally on like one of a handful of people.
Oh, cool, dude.
It's amazing. Last time we did this, we were sitting in an Airbnb in Nashville. Several years ago. That was fun.
I remember. I remember thinking it's like, Davey's so fancy with this setup. Look at this, man.
We realized how impractical that was.
Sure.
And then technology evolved, and we're like, you know what? This is great. We can do this over Zoom, and you can get up in your home in Nashville. I can get up in my home over here in Indianapolis, and we can just do this.
And I'm just drinking out of my Luke's coffee mug from Gilmore Girls, and this is how it's supposed to be, man.
This is exactly how it's supposed to be. Well, man, I would love, people, they can go back and listen to, we'll link the last episode we did with you, but I really want to dive into this journey that you've been going on over the past several months. And
sure.
This has just been unprecedented. When I saw that you were doing this, I was like, of course, Carlos Whittaker would be doing this.
Yeah.
And, but talk to us about this. You spent 7 weeks, basically split between time with monks, time with Amish farmers.
Yeah.
And the whole point of this was to disconnect/reconnect, which is basically the creative muse right there on the new book that you just released. But talk to me about this journey. What inspired it? Why was this something that was like, okay, I gotta take this step and actually do something?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I was actually, at the time when I decided to do this, I was writing my last book called How to Human. And, I'm in the thick of writing my How to Human book, and I'll never forget getting that screen time notification that comes across your phone on Sundays that says it's like the shaming notification. You have averaged, blankety blank hours and minutes a day. And I did what we all do. I kind of looked at it and I was like, ugh, and I swiped it away. It said 7 hours and 30 or 23 minutes or something. And I was like, gosh, man. But then I immediately started saying, well, I mean, it's my job. It's what I do for a living. Like, like my accountant friends are on their laptops all day. Like, why can't I, And so I didn't think about it. But then later that night, I just felt this nudging to do the math. I remember just feeling like, do the math. And I was like, what math? Just do the math on the screen time. And I was like, okay, 7 hours, 23 minutes a day. Before that, I looked up the average American spends 6 hours a day on their phone. So I was like, okay, I'm not too far off. 7 hours, 23 minutes a day, that's 49 hours a week. So that was the first piece of math that kind of like took the breath out of me. And I was like, wait, 49 hours a week? That 2 entire cycles of the sun. So like awake time, that's 4 days a week, right? Like awake time. But 2 days a week, I'm staring at my phone. I'm writing a book called How to Human. This is the least human thing I've ever done. Then I kept doing the math, and that equals 3 months a year. So 3 months a year, I'm looking at a phone. And then I was like, let me keep doing the math. I was like, well, the average American man lives to 85 years old. If I live to be 85 years old, I will spend over 11 years of my life looking at this screen. And I thought, whoa, this isn't right. This isn't human. I'm writing a book called How to Human. This isn't human. So immediately I just started thinking, what do I do? What do I do? How do I fix this? And, I started putting rules in place right away, screen time, lock my phone, and, all these things. And the rules kind of helped, but it felt like I was in handcuffs, like it felt like, I don't know, like I was looking for people that could help me, and I couldn't find really anyone with any sort of information to help me. So I just remember asking my wife, what if I just, do we think I could like go away for 2 weeks? This was initially what it was. And like move to a cabin somewhere and just not have any screens at all and see what it does. She's like, I think that's a great idea. Mm-hmm. So initially that was the idea, was I was going to go to a cabin for 2 weeks and see what it did if I didn't look at a screen. But then I was like, well, I want some data because I know that, I think that kind of stuff is important. So I direct messaged Dr. Daniel Amen, who is a neuroscientist. And I said, hey,
by the way, we literally just released an episode with him the time of this recording, just last week. No way. So our listeners, our audience are going to be very familiar with his work now. So,
well, they can go, okay, I'll tell that in a second. So I was like, hey, would you scan my brain? I'd love to know what's going on in my brain, what it looks like at 7.5 hours a day. And then if I didn't look at my phone for 2 weeks. And right away, he replied back and said, I'd love to do that. I'll scan your brain before and after, but 2 weeks isn't going to be long enough. You need more like 2 months. And I was like, what? and he's like,
going, who in the world can literally disconnect for 2 months?
Yeah. Right? I was like, I can't do this. This is my job. This is my,
right.
And so initially I was like, well, I'm just going to do it anyway, but I'm not going to get my brain scanned. But then I looked at my calendar and I talked to my wife, and we just happened to be in this random season in our life. Nobody has see, the reason why no one's done this is because nobody can do this, right? Like we got to work. We happen to be in this season of my life where I had about 7.5 weeks where I could legitimately disconnect. And my heart started pounding, and the idea, long story long, but the idea just kind of kept growing. And I was like, well, I think if I moved to a cabin for 7 weeks, I would go crazy. So like, what if I find some subcultures in America that I could live with that aren't as dependent on screens as we are? And I was screen free. So ended up moving into a Benedictine monastery for 14 days with 20 Benedictine monks and lived it with 23 hours a day of silence. And we can talk about that in a minute.
Yes.
Lived with them for 2 weeks. And then I flew to Cleveland, Ohio, got picked up by my friend Leanne. She drove me to Amish country. And then for the next 2 weeks, I lived on an Amish farm with the Miller family, a sheep farming family in Amish country, Ohio. I lived with them. So now I'm disconnected for a month. I did not look at a single screen, not an iPhone, an Apple Watch, a laptop, a TV, an iPad, nothing. Listen, when I was walking to the airport in between the two experiences, I only had a paper boarding pass because I didn't have a phone. And I'm just like, there's screens everywhere. You go to the toilet, there's screens. You sit on the plane, there's screens there. So I'm trying to not mess my brain up, right? I'm looking down. And then I left the Amish and I moved back home to Nashville with my family and lived 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks with them with no screen. So total of about 7.5 weeks. Then I flew back to Dr. Amen's clinic, got my brain rescanned, and then ended up writing a book about it. And, hopefully helping people realize what these phones are doing to our brains, but less about what the phones are doing to our brains and what reconnecting with who we were created to be can do to our souls. Yeah. And that's really everything that shifted for me.
Wow. Yeah. The book's called Reconnected, by the way, guys. And we'll put the link right here in the show notes if you're listening on a podcast platform. Or if you're watching on YouTube, we'll put it right below here. But, it's interesting. Now, personally, I feel convicted that we're not sitting in an Airbnb in person because we're looking at a screen. Because I'm
not the anti-screen guy. I tell people quick, like people are starting to like see me and then put their phones in their pockets really fast. I'm like, listen, I'm still on my phone. This book is not about why phones are bad. It's why it's beautiful on the other side of the phone.
Come on.
And so that there's enough books about why phones are bad. This is why it's beautiful on the other side. And when you find out what's beautiful on the other side, you just are gonna pick up your phone less. And so that's the only rule I have. Fall back in love with the other side of the screen, and you're gonna pick up your phone less.
It's interesting. There's been quite a movement of, you can almost say reverting back to contemplative practices, and probably a lot of it is a reaction of like something feeling like an unrest in our soul of going, man, there's just so much stimulation, there's so much dysregulation going on. And of course, we're talking a whole lot about trauma these days. And, it is a conversation that's very much in vogue. And, there's more education on it. We're seeing what the brain, thanks to guys like Dr. Amen, we're seeing what our experiences are doing to our brain. We're discovering how God wired us to work. And, so these are all wonderful things. But as we're reverting back to, as we're looking and drawing back from these contemplative practices of ancient times, you went into this monastery and you had this time of silence and solitude. What did you discover? What was like some of the big things that you really drew from that? You're like, okay, this is something I'm gonna have to begin to do something about this in my everyday life.
Well, I think the first thing I discovered was that our bodies, our souls, and our psyches, so our brains and our spirits, were not created. We're just not created to consume the capacity of content we consume. Like they weren't. And I don't think we know that right now. We think, oh yeah, look, we're adjusting. Like we're consuming more and more and more and more and more. But when I went from like 1,000 miles an hour to 3 miles an hour, my body legitimately those first 3 days was detoxing off of all this content. Like I was having heart palpitations, like physical manifestations of anxiety. It's not like I was like, I was having like shortness of breath, night sweats. I woke up the second night, like drenched. Like I had, like if you break up fever, like literally like my
it's
body
like you're describing like alcohol detox on some level, right?
I was
you just try to go cold turkey
and so I think the first thing I realized was that it was, these things are affecting our bodies. Like they're affecting our bodies in ways we don't understand. And I think I also quickly realized that, because the first 3 days was about how bad it was to not have my phone. But then, Davey, like day 4, I'll never forget, it felt like an elephant stepped off my chest when I woke up that morning. I was like, whoa. It's like I finally had detoxed, and I was like, wait, this is it. This is the way. This is, and I started walking at 3 miles an hour with these monks. I was praying 5 times a day with them. There was such stability to their lives. Breakfast in silence, dinner in silence, lunch you can speak. Just walking in a small community, and so I started to rediscover very quickly all the way that I think we were always supposed to live. Like. One of the first things that I realized pretty quickly was, I had a question about why the monks were doing something. And I immediately reached for my phone to Google it, because like, that's what we do. Like when we wonder something, we start wondering, we immediately kill our wonder with the wonder killer, which is Google.
Interesting.
And so I was like, I didn't have my phone. I was like, oh my gosh, it's grand silence from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. It's grand silence, so the monks can't talk. And I had this question, and I was stuck just wondering. It was the craziest thing. I was like, well, I'm not going to find out the answer. Like I'm just going to have to wonder. And so I just wondered. And I remember immediately thinking, wondering is gone. Like wondering is actually extinct. Wondering isn't asking the question. Wondering is what happens after you ask the question. So a question coming up when you say, oh, I wonder what happened. That's not wondering. That's asking the question. Wondering actually happens when you don't know the answer. And I spent 7.5 weeks not knowing the answer to so many things. And I felt so much more human not knowing. We have such access to all the answers all the time. You know, like if it was 2 p.m. in the afternoon and I'm walking through the monastery grounds, it's in the high desert of Southern California, and it's like smoking hot, like outside. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it is. I wonder how hot it is. I had no way to find out. It just was hot. Like it was just hot. And so I'm like, well, why do I feel the need to know exactly the temperature? No, it's hot. You know it's hot? It's hot. Right? And so one of the things that I quickly realized is we have lost the ability to wonder. And when you lose the ability to wonder, you lose the wonder, right? I'm talking about two kinds of wonder here. There's like wondering, and then there's the wonder of life, right? And so I suddenly was like reintroduced to the wonder of all of these things because I had to sit on them and think on them. And we've lost wondering and we've lost wonder. That was one of the things with the monks. Also, you know, obviously some of the things that people automatically think is like solitude. And in my book, I've got a lot of science behind, you know, solitude. We're the first generation to literally lose the ability to have solitude. Every generation before the ones walking the face of the earth right now had like purposeful, meaningful solitude in their lives every day. So if you traveled from point A to point B, there was no radio, there was no podcast, you just had solitude if you were alone. And that's gone now. And so, you know, what's that doing to us? Like what is, and so now I had solitude all the time. I was alone a lot. Being alone and solitude are two different things. And so, you know, I fell back in love with solitude, even though it was hard at the beginning. Some of the others, I call it Godspeed, 3 miles an hour. Like I started to see the monks and noticed just how slowly they moved, how purposeful they were with everything. And nothing in our lives move at 3 miles an hour anymore, except our own bodies. So like when the average person walks at 3 miles an hour. And so I started asking myself, well, what else in my life moves at 3 miles an hour? And I'm looking at these monks moving at 3 miles an hour. Nothing. Everything else moves at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And I started thinking about Jesus, and I started thinking about the speed and the pace of his ministry. Well, he walked everywhere. So Jesus literally did ministry at 3 miles an hour.
Wow.
And you look at ministries now and pastors now, come on, man. Who's actually following who? If God is moving, if God is a 3 mile an hour God and we're 100 mile an hour people, who's in front of who?
Right.
And so I just started thinking, man, what do I need to do to get back to this pace? So like the monastery was a very introspective, obviously, experience to where there was a lot of renovation being done to my spirit, to my soul, noticing something that we don't do anymore. There's a lost art of noticing. That's gone because of these screens. Wondering, solitude, boredom, savoring. Savoring. Again, savoring only happens at 3 miles an hour. You can't savor something. Like my first cup of coffee, right? I'm holding up my coffee here. What happens? My morning routine has changed because of this experience. And one of the things I noticed when I had my first cup of coffee at the monastery, you know, like I lived in this tiny little cabin at the top of the hill overlooking the monastery for 14 days. And it was a 1-room cabin. It was actually like the perfect little writing cabin. Although I wasn't writing anything, I was just like suffering for a few days and then loving it. But there was like this 1985 Mr. Coffee machine. But the cool thing is I could set it up with the little buttons on it to start brewing my coffee at 5 a.m. because the first prayer session was at 6. So since it was a 1-room cabin, like I'd set it up the night before, and then like, you know, I would wake up to the smell. I didn't even have to have an alarm clock. I'd wake up to the smell of coffee. And there was just something about like, I was like, why does the coffee taste so much better here? Like, this is Dunkin' Donuts blend. Why does it taste so amazing? And I realized, well, because I'm savoring it. I'm just drinking coffee. I'm not scrolling my feed. I'm not replying to emails and drinking coffee. That's why that first cup of coffee on vacation tastes so much better. So, I mean, Davey, I can literally, you could ask me this one question and I could go for 2 hours on all the things that I learned at the monastery that that literally I fell back in love with. And when you fall back in love with wondering and savoring and noticing and moving at 3 miles an hour, and you realize that that's how we were created to live, once you realize that, you don't want to go back, right? So it's like someone that has like rediscovered a healthy living and working out, and they've lost all this weight. They're like, well, they don't want, the temptation is going to be there, but you feel so good on the other side. Right. You just don't want to do it again. So falling in love with those things that I fell in love with at the monastery have legitimately cut my screen time by more than half. And so, and it's just because I'm noticing more, and I want to notice more, and I'm savoring more. And I've just set up my life to be able to do those things again. And so, yeah, it was incredible, man.
Hey guys, Davey here. Just want to interrupt this conversation and take a minute to talk to you about something that I genuinely believe could change not just the trajectory of your year, but honestly your entire life. This could change your relationships with others, your relationship with yourself, your leadership, your capacity as a friend, your capacity as a parent, as a son or a daughter, a coworker, an employee, an employer. I mean, literally everything about your life. And the reason I'm so passionately convinced of this is because, frankly, I've lived it. In fact, it's one of the main reasons Nothing is Wasted Ministries is that it exists. It's to help you break the limiting patterns in your life that are keeping you stuck and to walk in healing and purpose. When that happens, listen, everything about your life changes. Now, I know a lot of us in the month of January are taking stock of both where we are and where we want to be. And if you're anything like me, you like to put some action steps around your goals to get where you're going. I mean, after all, a goal without a plan is just a dream. However, you'll notice that you won't get very far trying to attack meaningful change with superficial means. And oftentimes, the real issues with our lack of progress lie within the things we haven't wanted to deal with or we haven't known how to deal with. The parts of ourselves we've pushed to the back burner or swept under the rug. Whether we want to admit it or not, it's these very areas of grief or disappointment or pain or unresolved trauma that are keeping us from the lives that we really want to live, the life that Jesus has made available to us. And so here at Nothing is Wasted Ministries, we've created a coaching program that is designed to come alongside you in your growth journey. This year, we want to invite you into a transformative one-on-one relationship with a guide, someone who knows what you're navigating because they've been there themselves. And the power of a coach is that they not only have the heart to help, but they also have the informed experience. They're able to bring both the insight and the tools into your journey and help you make progress you never could on your own. I'm talking about transformative change through deep work. All of our coaches are biblically centered, spirit empowered, and trauma informed, and many of them are trauma trained and certified. We're excited to announce that we have 2 separate coaching tracks available this year for the very first time. Of course, we have our flagship Pain to Purpose coaching, which we've had for several years, but now we have a new trauma recovery program as well. And I want you to hear my heart on this. I wouldn't be where I am today without the right relationships entering my life at the right time. People who had been through the wilderness of their own grief and were willing to show me the pitfalls, the landmines, the blind spots, and ultimately the way out. That's why I'm convinced of what it can do for you. If you're ready to get serious about your transformation, head over to nothingiswasted.com/coaching and choose which track is right for you, whether it's Pain to Purpose coaching or trauma recovery coaching. And if you still are undecided, you can't figure it out, just schedule a coaching placement call. You can do all that at nothingiswasted.com/coaching, and we'll also have the link available to you right here in the show notes. Listen, don't stay stuck another year, and do not try to go at it alone. We'd love nothing more than to help you discover the purpose in what you never would have chosen, right? There is purpose in our pain, and there is a way through this, but you have to do it with someone else. By yourself, you are going to be left floundering, stuck, reeling, trying to figure out a way through this valley. But together, healing is possible. Go to nothingiswasted.com/coaching to get matched up with your coach today. Yeah, let's get into that just a little bit. You know, you came back and you wrote a book on it, documentary. Like, on some level, you came back into a busyness of life. Albeit, you know, just as you said, not the same. Like, obviously, there was something that marked you as different. But I know, I mean, I just released a book too. So the book tour schedule, all that kind of stuff is crazy.
Yep.
and I'm feeling like I need a detox right now. How did you make that adjust? How did you come back into life, re-entry, and go, all right, these are some things I've got to. Did you put parameters on yourself, or was it just one of these things where it's like, I don't desire it anymore, or I don't? What did that look like?
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's there's all of these parameters you can put on. And listen, I may not be like the goal setting guy, right? Like I'm not. There's a lot of goal setting guys out there and girls and that are like, they can help you with those things. I'm telling you, if you can just start to taste the goodness of getting lost and finding your way, right? So I think, to answer your question, yes, there are things that I did, but I didn't do them out of a place of like, I need to do this to restrict my screen time.
Right.
I think restricting your screen time is going to fail every single time. I don't care who you are, what you do. Putting a screen time, lock on your phone is not that's cleaning the cobwebs, not killing the spider, right? Like
right,
we talk about that. That's all that is, right? And so you're gonna have to fall back in love with these things. And so, I did put things in place in my life that allowed me to stay in love with all of the. I probably have about 21 practices in the book that I fell back in love with. And because I put some things in my life to keep me in love with those things, my screen time has gone down. So, for instance, when I was with the Amish and Farmer Willis was like, hey, I need you to go to the feed store and pick up this part for my tractor. Here's the e-bike. And so like he got, I got on an e-bike and I.
Bro, by the way, you just nailed that Midwest farmer.
Oh, thank you.
Right there. That was phenomenal.
Thank you.
Okay.
I am basically Amish now, but I hopped on the e-bike and he's like, okay, this is how you get to the feed store, right? And so he told me, and I was like, wait a second. He's telling me, okay, first you're going to go down Highway 22. You're going to take a right at the stop sign, and then you're going to pass a big farm. You're going to take a left. You're going to go down about 2 miles, and you're going to go. And all of a sudden, I was like, does he expect me to remember this? like he's just telling me the directions. And I was like, I suddenly panicked, and I was like, wait, can I write it down? He's like, no, you'll remember. And let me tell you, it was supposed to be a 15-minute bike ride. It took me 2 hours because I kept getting lost. I turned one way and I'd go to another farm, and there's an Amish lady, folding her laundry or hanging her laundry. And I was like, excuse me, ma'am. And she's like, oh, are you Willis's friend? Obviously, I do not look Amish, right? And so, and the whole community knew I was there, and they're like, oh, you're feed store. You're going to go this way. You took a wrong turn. But man, I fell back in love with getting lost. There's something uniquely human about getting lost and finding our way that we don't do anymore. Literally, screens have reduced our ability to get lost and find our way. So one thing that I no longer do is I no longer use Apple Maps or Google Maps to get anywhere. So I will look it up before I leave, and I'll write it down. I wish I had a printer like 1987
like MapQuest, back in the day.
But I write the directions down, and then I go. And, initially I was like, oh, but there's probably, it tells me a faster way if there's traffic. Well, guess what? If there's going to be traffic, sit in traffic.
Wow.
Just be in traffic, right? So like no screen time for GPS. Like I don't use GPS anymore. I bought an alarm clock because that's what I used to wake up on this journey. I went to Target, bought this crazy thing called an alarm clock, plugged it in next to my bed. So I no longer use my phone as my alarm clock. And so I don't wake up in the morning and pick up my alarm clock and start like swiping its face and touching it, right? Like, no, all the alarm clock does is wake me up. My phone is being charged in the kitchen. And guess what? I wake up and I have my coffee. And now that alone saved me 1 hour of screen time, just buying an alarm clock, because the average American spends 30 minutes before they go to sleep and 30 minutes after they wake up scrolling on their devices. So there's a whole other hour that I got back. You do that math within a life. Now you've given back 3 years of your life by just buying an alarm clock. So then I go out and I have my coffee, and I love the news. And so, again, people are like, well, Carlos, are you Amish now? Are you a monk now? No, like I'm a news junkie. I love to know what's happening. So I walk in my front yard and I pick up this really crazy invention wrapped up in plastic, and I open it and I read the newspaper. It's a paper that tells me what's happening. And I deleted all the news apps off my phone. I deleted X off my phone. And now I get my news from a newspaper. And I read it. It takes me 20 minutes. And then if anything else happens on planet Earth, I'll find out tomorrow morning. Yeah. Right? Like, why do we feel the incessant need to know? We weren't created with that capacity. So again, we could spend a whole hour of you just asking me questions about this, but these practices, simple things that I began to do legitimately, on my screen time's like 3.5 hours a day now. I still work on my phone. I still make TikTok videos. I still do all those things, but I got back more than half of my life that I was losing because I fell back in love with all of these things that, it's like an inhaler to an asthmatic. It's like, we don't know that we have been asthmatic. We don't know. It's like, oh no, this is what it feels like to breathe until you really breathe. And then you're like, oh, that was the hit of the inhaler I needed. Now I don't ever want to go back to 50% breathing. I want to stay at 100% breathing. Wow. And that's the thing, Davey, that's going to get people to truly change their relationship with these screens.
Wow. I imagine you're doing a lot more creating than you are consuming, right?
Oh, yeah.
Even as you're using your screen because of all the, you think about like we call them the old dead guys, right? The guys that we read that are like, they've got these, whether it's theology, philosophy, or whatever it is, you're going, man, these guys thought deeply.
Oh,
they
dude.
sat
And
around
we
and
don't
talk. They said, and you're going, man, why don't we? I wish I could have insight like that.
Yeah.
And you're tapping into the source of that. You're tapping into really the well that goes, this is how creation happens, right?
It happens. It happens over, solitude. The volume of life is so loud that I believe that we can't hear the voice of God anymore. People struggle to hear it, and I'm like, well, it's because look at your screen time. Like, how in the world are you supposed to hear the voice of God when you're hearing the voice of all these pundits and podcasters and all these other things? Listen, I have a podcast. You have a podcast. That's great, but like, look at the amount of time you're spending consuming those things as opposed to how much time are you, in solitude. And that's where, these brilliant ideas, I think, that are missing for a lot of us come from. They come from slowing down. They come from, I'm doing this, preparing this kind of keynote for corporate America. It's kind of where I sit. And I even think that, companies and businesses, like screen time is actually a detriment, the amount of screen time that their employees are spending to the creativity in their companies, to all of these things that are happening. And so, you lessen the amount of those things. You allow your employees to be, church workers that are church pastors that are listening to your podcast, like, have screen-free days. Have days where, your meetings are no screens. It's just a paper and pen, and watch the ideas start to come. Watch the connectivity between your staff start to begin to explode. One of the things I learned from the Amish was all of their meals lasted so freaking long. Like, breakfast was an hour, lunch was an hour and a half, dinner was 2 hours. And I'm like, why do you guys eat for so long? And Willis was like, well, Carlos, like, this is our Facebook. Like, this is how we know what's happening, because they would visit with each other. Every meal was never alone. Every meal was always with other people in the community, and they would just visit. They would call it visit. They're like professional visitors. And I did some research when I got back and realized that the average American meal in 1923 lasted 90 minutes long. Wow. The average American meal in 2023 lasts 12 minutes long. So think just that stat alone, we have lost the ability to connect with each other over the table, to have community, which is why I think there's so much rage and division. We're not talking, man. We're typing with our thumbs. That's not human. That's not who we were created to be. So, bro,
so good. Don't
get me started.
Hi, friends. Just want to interrupt this conversation to see if you're looking for a way to help a friend who is hurting. You having a hard time knowing how to show up and show that you care in whatever pain they're walking through right now. Listen, we understand, and we've been there. Even though I've walked through my own trauma and painful season, I can still struggle to know how to best enter into the pain of those around me. I'll never forget the first funeral that I preached after losing my late wife Amanda in 2015. I showed up and I felt like I was stumbling through, not knowing what to say, because it just is so difficult to know exactly how to enter into somebody else's pain. In fact, there were so many people who were well-meaning right after my late wife passed away that they would send me all kinds of different things, but most of those things, they either filled my house with clutter or I ended up disposing of them because it just wasn't useful. As well-meaning and well-intentioned as people were, they just, I don't think, knew what to send me. You want to find that perfect combination of meaningful and thoughtful and practical. And that's why we've created the Nothing is Wasted Restore Box. The Nothing is Wasted Restore Box is just what you've been looking for as you seek to show support and love for a friend, a coworker, or a family member who is hurting. The Restore Box is a thoughtfully curated gift box that has some of our favorite resources and reminders from Nothing is Wasted Ministries that will encourage anyone who is walking through a difficult time. Whether it be loss, a divorce, a lost job, an unexpected diagnosis, betrayal, or just a season of depression or anxiety, or really any other pain point for that matter. This box is for when someone you love needs a reminder of hope and that nothing is wasted in their pain. Each Restore Box includes a copy of the Nothing is Wasted book, a copy of the Pain to Purpose devotional, a beautifully crafted scripture pack full of encouraging verses, the Nothing is Wasted anvil paperweight, and a Nothing is Wasted wristband. Now, we know it's hard to step into someone's pain, but we also know the cost of not stepping in is far greater. You can show you care and offer hope at the same time by sending your friend the Restore Box. Just head to nothingiswasted.com/RestoreBox. That's Restore Box, RESTOR box. So leave off that second E and give a meaningful gift to someone in your life who is hurting. You can follow the link in the show notes if you're listening to this on a podcast platform, or right below this YouTube video if you're watching it on YouTube, nothingiswasted.com/RestoreBox, and give the gift of hope and healing to that person in your life who's going through a difficult time. nothingiswasted.com/RestoreBox. Well, one of the things, I was telling you beforehand, we have this course, Pain to Purpose, and it's a place where people can, they can find healing from trauma, tragedy, major life transition. One of the components of that, one of the trail markers we call it, is there's a waypoint where we talk about spiritual rhythms, where we talk about Sabbath rest, where we talk about physical rhythms that really foster and engender healing and wholeness. I can imagine this journey that you've gone on really helped to open up your heart to healing from some things that maybe you hadn't, you're like, wow, I didn't even realize this was still in the recesses of my soul right now.
Oh, yeah.
And I also know that you guys have gone through quite a journey with your dad.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as to how some of this journey helped to inform how you've walked through that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think with my dad, so my father has dementia, and I was able to move my parents in across the street from me. I haven't lived in the same state as my parents for 24 years. And so now they're across the street, and it's amazing. And I get to care for my mom, who's caring for my dad. But all of these things that I experienced at the monastery what they've done is it's brought my community, because the way I'm living now, I feel like I'm a so much more present son. I'm so much more of a present friend. That, like, if I'm with my dad, I'm never on my phone ever. If I'm with my mom, I'm never on my phone. Like I may have my phone in my pocket. Right. I'm not like a digital minimalist, right? It's not like I'm like, Carlos doesn't have any screens anymore. No, I got just as many screens as everyone else has. But one of the things I've done that has tremendously affected my relationships is my phone has been placed for the last year and a half on permanent do not disturb. So literally, I have not gotten one single notification, buzz, or ding on my wrist or my pocket that has taken me away from the people that I'm in conversation with. And so if you think about it, when I was with the monks and the Amish, that was one of the first things that I realized. The first time a monk, like, I was in a conversation with a monk, and like they're like, oh, and they felt their phone buzz in their pocket or their robe, and they reached into the robe and they pulled it out, and they're like, I'm sorry, hang on one second, and they put it back in. Yeah, they only left me for a second, but I was so offended. I was like, did a monk just straight up like do this to me? And so even the monks have these problems, right? Like even and so, but I'm just so much more present now. I think I'm, especially with the platform that you have and what you're teaching and helping people go through. I mean, I'm going through like a very long traumatic experience with my father, right? With his dementia. And so like, it's not like this was a quick thing. This is like, I'm swimming in the trauma every day, but I think because I'm so reconnected to who I was created to be, I just feel like I'm able to handle it a lot better, because I don't have all of this other weight on my shoulders. Like, I don't have the weight of the world and what's happening around planet Earth. It's so funny. I'm like, my mom knows way more about the news now than I do. She's like, did you hear what happened? I was like, no. She's like, Carlos, you need to know. I was like, no, I don't. Like, I don't need to know. Like, I have so much more capacity to care for people, to care for myself. because I have limited, the amount of time that I'm spending consuming and, on these screens. And so, yeah, man, I think that it has affected my ability to heal. I think it has, in a good way, it's encouraged my ability to heal, my ability to process the trauma that I'm witnessing with my father every single day. And also, just set me up to be able to even help my mom and to help a lot of my friends. Friends, that's another thing. Like my guy friends, I was probably the worst dude friend ever. Like just never return a text message, never really care or, and all my friends are like, dude, this is so weird how like engaging you are to us now. Like you just, I'm just thinking about them more because I just have, if you really think about it, the way that we live, and I got to experience this with the Amish, we only really have the capacity to know what's happening in our neighborhood, with our kids' teachers, with the butcher, the librarian, the postmaster, like what's happening within a tiny little circle of who we are. And because I was filled to the brim with knowledge of like what was happening and who to pray for and all these things that was happening. And I didn't have a screen. And then you add the layer of like, okay, now we know what's happening with our friends around the country and then our friends around the world and then strangers around the world. And then what's happening, every moment of every second and then it's like, well, of course we don't have the ability to be true friends anymore because we're caring about too much. So again, that's a great question because it really has impacted the way that I wade through a lot of traumatic seasons in my life.
Well, and of course we're, because we're inundated with all of that news from all of these different spheres that are outside of our own just sphere of influence in our little community.
Yep.
Of course we're feeling anxiety. Of course we're feeling like the overwhelming sense of, man, this stuff's just pressing in on around us. I heard John Eldredge talk about one time this idea of benevolent detachment.
Yeah.
Where Jesus chose to step away and detach. He didn't heal everybody. He didn't care for everybody. He didn't, right? There were certain ones that he knew intentionally, this is what I'm going to do to set an imprint, right? For the 3 years that I have here. And then he detached. Yep. And if the Son of God has to do that, oh my goodness.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
How much more do we have to do that as well?
Yeah, man.
Well, talk to me about this too. Screens in and of itself, they, you mentioned earlier about this idea that, and you kind of alluded to this, that this hearing the voice of God, right?
Yeah.
And how they can prevent us. I mean, all of this stuff can really prevent us from hearing the voice of God. How is there anything else that, in terms of now listening to the voice of God, trying to find direction, trying to find what it is you need from the Lord, that you have intentionally, I would say, adjusted in your life because of this? Because that is one of the biggest things that people are struggling through right now, whether they're in a season of pain and grief and they're going, hey, I just don't feel like I sense God's presence. We say things like, oh, Psalm 23 verse 4, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And there's so many people right now who are going, I don't sense him. I don't hear him. I don't feel him. I don't know that he's with me. This is really difficult. And there are certainly seasons where there is a dark night of the soul where, God has, it seems like, intentionally stepped back, right? He's not absent, but his presence, his felt presence is not there.
Yeah.
But probably for most of us, it's that we're not able to hear the voice of God, or we're not inclined to it. So talk to me a little bit about that in terms of how do we begin to reconnect practically? What does that look like? What adjustments have you made to go, okay, here's what I'm going to do to try to hear the voice of God now in my life?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And I go back to the monastery for this because one of the a lot of the conversations I was having with the monks is like, all right, you guys are like, you're walking with God all day long. Like us normal people can't do this, like we're, how do, and all of them that I'd asked this question to are like, do you really think that like, we're just like face to face with the breath of God on a daily basis? No, Carlos, there's months I go through where I'm like, where are you, Lord? I'm like, what? A monk? He's like, yeah. But what has brought me and saved us every single time when we feel this way is that, monks take 3 vows. These Benedictine monks: obedience, stability, and fidelity. And there's a stability to the practices that these monks continue to do. They pray 5 times a day right? And that's just the prayer that other guests can go to. They pray more than that. But every single day, they go back to the same thing, even in seasons where they don't feel like they can feel the breath of God anymore in their face. They continue. And I think that's the ticket. I think it's like, you know what? I'm going to take a vow of stability with the Lord. Even when I don't feel his breath in my face, I will continue to wake up, get into the word, pray, and ask him very specific questions. And if I don't hear a specific answer, I will ask again. And I will ask again. And, and people are going to go through decades sometimes. I've been praying for 6-7 years now for my dad and his memory. Lord, stop the memory loss. Stop it. Like, I ask very specifically every day. It hasn't happened. But there's a stability to me asking until the day my dad goes home. That is still growing my faith, even though I'm not getting the desired results that I'm thinking. I'm still face to face with God. And I feel like for those people that are listening that are like, I don't feel him anymore. I've tried. Find stability, find some semblance of, you don't have to pray 6 times a day, the hours like the monks do. But if you can set up something that this is just a normal part of your day. So again, for me, that's I've got my routine in the morning where I praise God for who he is, and I thank God for what he's done. So, and I've got my little journal, and I've got like my one song that that I play for months at a time. This Is How I Fight My Battles by Upper Room Worship. I like their version the best. They wrote it. And so I listen to that every single, and that's like my routine. And man, I'll tell you, there have been weeks where I'm like, Lord, show me, what do I read today? Nothing. Crickets, but then it's kind of like, any golf players out there that are listening to you, and you're just horrible at golf and you want to give up and you want to give up, but there's something about like, well, I just, I love I love being on a golf course. I love, even though I'm not hitting any good shots. And then after 4 months, you hit that one shot.
You pure it. Yep.
And you're just like, and then you're like, you're back, right? But what did that take? It took stability. It took just the constant going back every single day, even when it wasn't working. It will work. I promise you it will. Maybe not even in the way that you're thinking. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but,
that's good.
But the monks really helped me with that.
Yeah, I think that's super helpful. Super helpful. I mean, we get that question a lot. Whereas I don't, and C.S. Lewis said this, right? Where he whispers to us through our pleasures, he speaks to us through our conscience. He shouts in our pain, and so often in painful seasons, that's where we are attuned the most because we've, on some level, been emotionally paralyzed. Mm-hmm. So now we're debilitated, right?
Yeah.
We're like forced to sit.
Yeah.
And then there's a space where God can speak into that space.
Absolutely.
And, and so I think being able to, without, I hate to use the word disciplines because you're really talking more about this idea of tasting something, taste and see that this is good, right?
Yes.
And like desire to build these rhythms, desire to like see beyond the screen, not just try to restrict yourself from the screen, which I think is just so much more captivating.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I'm not saying that putting up guardrails in your life isn't going to be helpful. But instead of putting up guardrails, why don't you build the freaking road? Build the road to get you to where you want to be.
I love it. Carlos, man, thank you so much. Okay. So, obviously we'll put links here to Amazon and everywhere else we can get connected to Reconnected, the book, right? But talk to me about the documentary. Is that available for people to? Okay, so how do we do that? How do we?
It will be soon. So it's not yet. So I made this documentary because I took a little Sony camera with me. If you're watching on YouTube, or I've got it right here. Like so, it's I tell people all the time. Here it is. It's you can actually have a camera without having a phone. It's the craziest thing ever. It's a crazy invention. And so I self-documented on this camera my journey. All of my mental breakdowns, all the things that happened, a lot of me crying in the documentary. And then I turned it into a 90-minute documentary. And so my Kickstarter, I raised it, all the funds on Kickstarter. So all my Kickstarters have it. And we are currently right now looking for distribution. And so I am hoping by January 1st, we will have this thing where anybody that listens to your podcast will be able to find it.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, man, thanks for spending some more time with us. And it's always great to have you back with the Nothing is Wasted community, and excited for you and excited to see what God continues to do through this. I mean, this is a paradigm shift, and it's a very important conversation for us, especially right now in a critical time in history. And so thank you for being that voice, man. We really appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of the Nothing is Wasted podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation and found it as encouraging and insightful as we did. Now, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen, and leave us a rating and review. Your feedback helps us to connect to those who need these stories of hope and healing most, and to reach more listeners just like you. Also, subscribe to our Nothing is Wasted Ministries YouTube channel. Now, be sure to stay connected with us on social media. You can follow us at Nothing is Wasted Ministries, follow me at Davey Blackburn, and follow Aubrey at ObSam. We'd love to interact with you, so be sure to stop by and let us know how these conversations are impacting you and your story. And if you want to learn more about all the incredible resources we have available to help you navigate whatever valley you're walking through, visit our website at nothingiswasted.com. If you're ready to get started in your journey towards healing and finding purpose in your pain, we'd love to help. Simply go to nothingiswasted.com/start here for your next step. Lastly, a big thank you to Sleeping at Last for providing all the music for the Nothing is Wasted podcast. We want to thank our guests, and we want to thank you, our Nothing is Wasted community, for tuning in regularly. Remember, no matter what challenges you face, whatever pain you are walking through, nothing is wasted. We'll see you next time for another incredible conversation here on the Nothing is Wasted podcast. But before you go, check out this short clip from our next episode. Thanks for joining us, friends.
And that has been the key thing, is not putting my hope into people and putting my hope in God, because people are going to disappoint you, you know?
Yeah.
But the thing that's giving me hope is this next generation, as we have started our college and youth, seeing how kids see things differently, and just the things that we tolerate and we try to make complex.
Yeah.
Kids don't see it that way. And, racism is not, you're not born racist, we're not born with this. But we start developing biases as early as 3 years old, it's taught to us. And so if we stop teaching it,
imagine.
Just imagine, just imagine the world, that we could live in.